Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. I have to say that these interviews are the highlights of my lockdown week. It's been such a joy and a real privilege to be able to get in touch with these people and bully them into coming on the show. It's not that hard because everyone's stuck at home anyway. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation, regardless of where you are in the world. It is, pertinent to the United Kingdom, but it's also the topics we were discussing are very global. This week, my wonderful guest is Siân Berry, who is the co-leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. Now, one of the topics we don't really touch on, although I suppose we skirt around it, is, I have never been a member of any political party. And not really, it just hasn't, nothing has made me want to do it. I don't know what else to say there, but I'm really impressed when people make that commitment, regardless of the politics in a way, when they make that leap, because you are absolutely automatically going to meet a resistance to whatever you suggest and whatever your political beliefs are. And I suppose, as a coward, I've kind of steered around that and tried not to be, pigeonholed in any way. Clearly, there's a lot of the things that the Green Party stand for, argue for, have fought for many, many years now, decades now, that I would be broadly in sympathy with. I don't think that's would come as a surprise to anyone who's watched or listened to these shows. But that said, I always reserve my right to judgment. But all that aside, Siân Berry, just a really intelligent woman who's got a brilliant grasp of what's going on in the world, particularly in relation to the topics that we cover on Fully Charged. And one of the interesting things she says, and you'll hear her talk about this, is the number of scientists or people with science degrees that are in the Green Party, which I think is very interesting. It's clearly a very highly educated group of political people. So before we start that, here's a quick word from our wonderful, glorious, and very gorgeous sponsor. My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy, driving the charge to a greener future. Okay, here we go. Please welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast, the co-leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, Siân Berry. I've written down loads of the most annoying and pathetic questions.
Excellent. Okay.
So you're full at liberty to go, oh, for goodness sake, you should know that. But Siân, thank you anyway for taking the time to talk to us. And the thing I want to be reminded of, because I know I've read about it, but it was a long time ago, is where the Green Party, I'll just say before that, we'll cut this bit out. I will do an introduction separately so that I will introduce who you are. So that's all that stuff. Anyway, so the thing that I'm trying to remember is, did the Green Party start in Germany? Was that the first Green Party that happened? Or was you're testing me on my Green Party history. I don't think so. I think there were things like Silent Spring and Limits to Growth and real thinking around this area. And I think it kind of happened in the very early 70s, sort of spontaneously in lots of places around the world. I have a feeling that you could be right then, because I just always thought of it, because I think the first time there was a Green Party people got into power, even in local politics, was in Germany. That might be the case. In terms
of getting elected, they've got a very, very long history.
Yes.
But I've got a feeling that actually the Green Party of England and Wales, which started out as People Party back in the 70s, about a year before I was born.
Right. The trouble is, I can remember
the first. They really got in there, but they were obviously tiny to begin with. They
Yes.
first the 1974 general election, but very sort of
Wow.
let's give it a go kind of thing.
Yes.
And it wasn't really, through the 70s, Green parties grew up, and then in the 80s we were ready to start winning seats.
Yeah.
And Germany is the first place where you really saw that. And that I think has to do with nuclear weapons came out of that whole anti-nuclear bases kind of movement there.
Yeah, because that was the very clear and, to be fair to everyone involved, accurate appraisal of nuclear power in that period. So from the 50s to the 70s, it was absolutely linked to nuclear weapons. It wasn't like, you can now argue that it's possible to generate nuclear power and not have any connection to nuclear weapons. It's different technology, but then it wasn't. It was exactly. It was.
No, they needed reactors doing stuff to make all those warheads. Basically, yeah.
But my one proud claim is that I attended Comtech 74 in Bath, which was the Community Technology Festival. And it was an amazing event. It really had a huge impression on me. So there were exhibits in a park in Bath of wind turbines, which just unbelievably crude. And I've got somewhere, I did find the brochure of Comtech 74 that was hand printed on a Roneo or Gestetner printer, I think it was. And it's almost impossible to read. And but there were solar water heating, because I had a shower and scalded my head because I was stupid. I didn't mix it. And I thought, well, this is going to be cold. Turned it on and it's almost steam. And that was at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was almost producing steam. It was lethally hot.
That's fantastic. So that became the Centre for Alternative Technology.
Grew out well. I wonder when that started. We were certainly involved in it because I've been up there since, and I met someone who is the only person I've ever met who was also there at the same time. I didn't know them, who attended that. So there were people from all over Europe there. There was a Belgian group called Mass Moving, MAAS Moving, who built a solar trumpet that the police came and said, could you turn it down? And that was a solar water heated, generated steam, blew it through a huge trumpet, which just went, and it was deafeningly loud. So yeah, there was a lot of silliness and amazing stuff there. But when you think of that generation of people, I was talking about this to a Swedish journalist recently. Effectively, I'm at the tail end of that generation. I'm the youngest. I was young, even though I'm very old, I was quite young in 1974. So the people who were in their like mid-20s, early 30s then, who were involved in that, effectively went on to create a lot of the renewable energy companies and generating systems that we see today. That was that.
Absolutely. So yeah, in our history, you've got people like Jonathan Porritt.
Yes.
I'm not going to call him old, but he's definitely.
He might even be slightly older than me.
And he was young then. He was our young sort of leader at the time. It was all of that kind of thing was. And it's matured. Like you say, people are now running big companies, achieving an awful lot. You've got Jeremy Leggett's another example.
Yes.
I think you probably know. Solar Century and all of that. Now he's really incredibly high up in what is a very mature industry. In America now, you've got solar power being the cheapest, easiest way to generate electricity, and it's just winning. It's winning the free market race.
Yes, I think that's what I'm certainly the last, say, 5 years. It's been an absolute joy to be focused on this technology, because there was a long time where it was, that my first solar panels that I put on my roof, the only reason I could do that was because I had a reasonable income and my children had grown up and I could afford it. It was really, really expensive. And there was no way I could live long enough to pay that back. Now it makes economic sense. Normal, sensible people who've got good pension plans and, that sort of thing, they want solar panels because they go, that will be, sensible. Sorry, I was just going to quickly say the one area where that's really apparent, because my wife is Australian. So we've spent a lot of time there, is the Australian suburbs, which I don't think you can classify as hotbeds of radicalism. If you see a house, when we were there with the kids, we used to do I Spy to spot a house that doesn't have solar panels. And it's really hard. It's been a phenomenal uptake there. It's completely different attitude.
And going through Germany as well, that whole, a village has solar panels on every roof, basically. And it's so different to here. But also in Germany, the famous increase in community wind power comes through the investment of essentially middle-class pension funds, which are done on a much more sort of regional, local level anyway there. But you've got like doctors and dentists and people like that who've got, thinking about what to invest in. We're really behind putting together a lot of the investment that led to increased wind power in Germany as well.
Because we went to one in Austria, a wind farm in Austria, or it was a community wind farm, and I was a bit skeptical about making the effort of getting there. I was going, is this going to be worth it? And then, spoke to the people there, and they were very nice. So I went there and saw this, and I was expecting, I think, 2 15 kilowatt wind turbines out on a hill, little thing like that. It was huge. There's 27 2 megawatt wind turbines. It's a small town. It wasn't a village. It was a small town, but it was small. And all the people in that town they don't even know what an electricity bill is. They all have electricity and an income. That's what they've invested in. So they don't only get free electricity, they get paid, which is, when you see that happening, and the people who were behind that were, however you look at it, it's very difficult to judge Austrian politics, but I would say broadly conservative attitudes. There was not one old hippie like me in evidence. They were either young, amazing technocrats who designed and running it, or nice old men who were the mayor and the farmer that owned the land.
They're
extraordinary. Absolutely.
It completely fits in with that whole small C conservative sort of civic pride.
Yes.
These are not necessarily radical values. They are. I mean, the politics in this country is different. We're much more like America, and things like community wind farms. I went to to be honest, it was massive, but I went to a community solar farm now I've forgotten which county I was in. Warwickshire, I think it was. And I was expecting a field, and it was a very, very large field.
Wow, brilliant!
Very, very good.
Yeah, no, there are schemes like that here. I mean, I tried to do one in our village, and we've had there has been some movement, but it's how the technology is catching up, and I mean that must have affected. I mean, I want to try and get back to how the Green Party's attitudes, but the fact that the technology has advanced to such a great degree in the last 5 years actually makes the arguments different. Because you could argue we should have renewable energy 10 years ago, which it's pretty obvious, but it was still more expensive. The technology was still developing. We didn't know how long it would last. People thought we'd be throwing away batteries after 3 years. All those things. And we just didn't know. When I first had an electric car and Jeremy Clarkson said, you'll throw the battery away after 3 years, I went, I don't know if he might be right. I didn't know. No one knew, because no one had done it before. And now we know how profoundly, deeply wrong he was. You've got to celebrate that.
Take that leap a little bit and at least invest in pilots at scale to prove things like that at the right time. And we really did miss a lot of boats in this country. We've got the opportunity with tidal power. So one of the most reliable things that does that creates energy,
predictable, I suppose.
Energy from is the tides, and we should have been really moving on that from a long time ago. But it's still a technology that's relatively new, and we are investing in some research and some deployment now. So there's a chance we might get ahead in one of the renewables at some point.
And I mean, we certainly are. I mean, by the statistics, the global leader in offshore wind. It's just that the offshore wind's all been installed by Danish and Norwegian companies. But it employs a lot of people here, which is very good. And
it does, exactly. And I think a lot of people now, particularly in Scotland, with Scottish Greens are a separate party from us, but the Scottish Greens there have really, really sort of motoring ahead in terms of talking about transitioning away from oil and gas. And obviously Scotland being so dependent on oil and gas, that's been quite not a taboo subject, but something that people didn't really want to talk about because so many people's jobs depended on it. But now I think you can talk about this transition because there are alternatives that you can sort of see working at scale and replacing that amount of jobs with new things to do that are greener. So
yes, yeah, because that was certainly a thing that was a shock for us. We filmed up in Orkney a few times, so they're doing amazing stuff there. I mean, it's a very good experimental island it's becoming. But when we drove up the east coast of Scotland in an electric car, but I don't even know if they're lochs, but the kind of big inlets, tidal inlets there, are car parks or dumping grounds for oil platforms. I mean, it's not like one or two. You drive past this thing and this whole beautiful landscape with trees and the water and that, and in the middle there's hundreds of big oil derricks, massive things that have been towed in and stored there because there isn't the oil anymore. We've used it all up.
I've never seen that.
It's the most remarkable thing. I've got pictures of it. It is extraordinary. I mean, there'll be, if you Google it, you'll see. But I mean, I don't think they're necessarily being scrapped. I think some of them are being towed to other locations in the world. It takes months to pull them across the sea to somewhere else. But they're not in the North Sea to the extent that they were. I mean, there was an enormous amount of activity there. But the thing we learnt then was the amount of engineers and technicians that worked in offshore oil who've transferred to offshore wind is amazing. And even the ships, the actual support vessels, we're going to film on one this year with a bit of luck, that install and maintain wind turbines were originally built to install and maintain oil rigs.
Yeah, an awful lot of the activity surrounding the industries is the same in terms of.
Yeah.
The good thing about wind power is you just stick it into the grid. You don't have to. You don't have to transport it again. No. I mean, that's part of the problem with sort of liquid and solid fuel. But apart from that, there's a lot of the same activity needed in terms of jobs and logistics and all of that.
Because then, so here's a question, because I don't know, and I could have researched this. But I just wondered how many actual elected representatives there are. Not because I know, but I've met Caroline Lucas, so we've got one Green MP in the UK.
Yeah.
But how many other elected officials there are, like in local councils? Do you know what those figures are roughly?
I roughly do. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Obviously, we had a really good European elections last year.
Yes.
Where we elected MEPs in 6 of the regions around the country. Now they've gone, which is really sad. That was the next level down from MPs. Then you've got people like me and Caroline Russell. We're in the London Assembly, and that's right. A regional body. We scrutinise the mayor's work, and we're hoping this year, if the elections go ahead as planned, to get our first Wales Senedd member as well. So that Wales is a country, but it's the same kind of secondary level of government. Then we've got, let me get this right, 5 MSPs, I think.
Right.
If I remember them, for Scotland, so that's the Scottish Parliament. And then in local councils, the sort of the ones that, so excluding town and parish councils, we've got over 350 councillors now.
Right.
And we managed to sort of double our councillors at the last election.
Right.
There were a lot of councillors up for re-election, and we got the ones we wanted to re-elected, and then there were lots of gains. So we actually doubled our whole number of councillors in one election in 2019.
Right.
And we're on 18 councils administrations now. So you've probably heard of Brighton, where there was a bit of a collapse in the Labour group there, so they couldn't run the council on their own anymore.
Right.
We stepped in, and we're now the minority administration in charge of Brighton and Hove City. But there are other councils where there's no overall control, and we're part of groups that have got together to run the councils, and that's groups of all kinds of different kinds. Lots with Labour, with Lib Dems as well. Sometimes us Labour and the Lib Dems. Then local councils, you have independents as well. So there are 18 councils we're helping to run now, and that's really exciting. That's Greens in power actually making a difference, and that's really shifting a lot of councils along the way in terms of climate action and making plans for that, but also coronavirus recovery. The two problems are quite the same when it comes to what you might do. And so we've got Greens doing some really excellent stuff around the country now. So I'm very since I became co-leader, it's been really exciting.
All right.
I was on the radio with on LBC with Ian Dale, and he said, "Well, you've been a very successful leader, haven't you? Like 6 months into my term, and we've doubled the number of councillors." I think you'll find that's years of hard work.
Yes, there may be one or two other people involved.
Yeah, so it takes a while to get over that tipping point, but I think that doubling shows that there is a tipping point. You work hard for long enough, and you get yourself elected. And hopefully we'll keep seeing that sort of pace of growth when we get more elections again.
Because it is a fascinating discussion that I've, off the air, if you like, just with mates, been talking about the long-term impacts of what we're going through at the moment, of the pandemic, around the world as well. It's not just here. I mean, it is. I was talking to a friend in France yesterday because they do, just so that our listeners know, the Dutch and the French, I know from 2 conversations yesterday, call the new variant the English flu. And they were very reticent to call the original, what they wouldn't call it the Wuhan flu as Trump did. They wouldn't use that, but they're very happy to call it the English flu, which I think, what can we say? Anyway, that aside, it is the thing that I've felt I'm aware of is people who aren't in a little insane bubble of obsession about renewable energy, electric vehicles, the energy transition that I am, but who have mentioned completely unprovoked, oh, it was amazing during the first lockdown. I went for a walk in London and I could smell that it was different. It smelled like your back garden, because they've been to visit us and we're out in the middle of nowhere. And that's what they remember. And they went, it smelled fresh. I was going, well, can you please remember that?
It was absolutely extraordinary. Yeah. I mean, obviously for a terrible reason, but just showing the daily impact of our normal activity. Yeah. That when you take that away, how the city is, it smelt different. The air was so clear. Yeah. The sky was so blue, because normally even on a clear day you get a haze.
It's a bit grey. Yeah.
And you could hear the birds, and it was just like so immediately different. It was a big shock to everybody about what the difference we make is on a daily basis with all that activity. And it's mainly car driving that's the thing that was different about the city. Yeah,
because there would have still been deliveries and trucks and vans, I suppose, at that time. That would have still been happening. I mean, there was we had tractors and delivery vans, even at the height of lockdown. So.
Yes, that's true. I mean, a lot of vans did go, because a lot of vans are doing sort of construction work stopped. I mean, everything stopped.
Yes, it did more than this time, didn't it?
Coming around, you weren't getting the sort of plumbers and things like that. Yeah. So certainly logistics carried on, but it was so quiet. I mean, I made a point of walking down all the main roads in the middle just because I could. Yeah, so I was walking down Holloway Road because there were so few cars that then the road is straight and clear. I wasn't taking a big risk. Sorry, to be clear to people, don't walk down the middle of the road when it's not safe. But you've just got so much warning when a car was coming that you could basically walk in the middle of the road. And it was
that must be extraordinary.
Yeah. Do that. Yeah. I don't know if you know Holloway Road, but it's
I do. No, I used to live very near. Yeah. No, that because a friend of mine walked from somewhere sort of Battersea-ish to Hampstead-ish, between 2 houses at the height of it, and sent me photographs from Oxford Circus. And it was like 28 days later. That was what
I went down Oxford Circus on my bike and just did circles in the middle of it. It was because I could.
Cannot imagine it.
So weird.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm sort of hoping that there is a kind of, it's been proven. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the figures of electric vehicle sales for the last year. Every motor manufacturer had a catastrophic collapse in sales of petrol and diesel and hybrid cars. Completely just fell off a cliff. It wasn't a slow decline. It just stopped, except electric cars, which had a 280% increase in sales. People basically, if they're going to buy a car, they buy an electric one, and which is good. But I mean, this is one of the topics I wanted to talk to you about, because it's become such a clear realization for me. 10 years ago, got an electric car and went, this is different. This strikes me as more of a change than, it's a different engine. Who cares? This is a totally different machine that does a different job. But it took me about 5 or 6 years to go, oh, hang on, if all the cars that are on the road in these islands are electric, we're basically, we've improved things a bit.
Yeah.
In terms of energy independence and air quality. But, it's a stupid notion. And I do not know how you legislate this, but all I know is, and it's a completely accepted fact across all political views, industries, everything, between 90 and 95% of the time, a private car is not in use.
Yeah.
Which means it's sitting on our streets, doing nothing, in the way.
Yeah, no, exactly. In a city, wasting that much space is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Car parks I'm standing for Mayor of London, as you know. Car parks are fully on my agenda in lots of different ways. Workplace parking, the amount of people who still drive into central London.
It staggers me when I go there. Yeah.
It's tens of thousands of people a day into each of the boroughs in central London, and it isn't the people who live in those boroughs who are making those journeys. A lot of them are coming from outside of London. People who don't want to get on the train, or they're coming back too late. You've got to be filling the gaps and making sure those people can travel on public transport. But also, we can't give away that much of our real estate in London to parked vehicles for one person. That's ridiculous waste of space. Can I go back to something you just said?
Yes, no, please do.
Incredibly interesting what you just said about that spike in electric car purchases.
Yeah.
And so do you remember, I mean, you do remember, obviously, because I was there with you at the time when I was campaigning on cars, range anxiety being the big thing about electric vehicles. So people thinking that the car is not only freedom, it's your sort of insurance, that you've got a private vehicle to get out of there if something goes wrong. And the idea that you might run out of your power source halfway was quite, so that's a resilience fear. And I wonder whether the resilience in sales of electric vehicles, in fact, the increase you just described through this crisis, is to do with a complete change, that they're seen as more resilient. So if the supply chain broke down on the oil, like we were discussing before, it needs to be transported around, then that's a real crisis. And we've seen that before. We've seen oil crises causing real problems for people who own cars in the past.
Yeah.
But knowing that the electricity is, any electricity will do to charge your car.
Doesn't matter where it comes from.
More resilient.
Yeah.
So people thinking along the lines of, how would I survive a disaster, which is sadly, we all think much more like that now.
Yeah.
Perhaps Greens used to think like that more, but I think everyone is thinking, well, is my lifestyle resilient?
Yeah.
Is my home resilient? And the fact that people see electric cars as resilient now, as opposed to risky, that's a tipping point, isn't it?
Yeah. There was a beautiful video a few years ago on YouTube of because I met a few of them when I worked in Los Angeles, a Hispanic guy in New York State who wore a hairnet. It's a cultural thing that I don't quite understand why. He was so funny, and the guy I knew in Los Angeles, who was such a lovely man, but he wore the hairnet. It's. I think you wear it in the day and then you take it off at night when you go to the club. I don't quite get it. But this guy was in a hairnet, and he was in a Nissan Leaf, but he lowered the seat so that the door, so he was like really, really low in it. He was driving from an area where there was a very serious blackout in a suburb of New York. He was driving from there about 40 miles up the road to an area that still had power, and filling, this is what is extraordinary about it, filling petrol cans for his friends. Because when there's a power cut, people used to say, well, if there's a power cut, you can't charge your car. When there's a power cut, electric petrol pumps don't work. And there were queues of people trying to buy petrol because they couldn't get to where there was power to fill their cars. This was I would think about 2015, somewhere around then, maybe a bit before. So Nissan Leaf was still quite early. So he was driving to buy petrol, then driving back, but he could charge when he was buying the petrol, and then he was driving back and giving them all the petrol and then going back. He did it a few times, and he made this very funny video, and he was very funny about it. I shouldn't have mentioned the hairnet because that was so irrelevant to the story. I just remember it. But
that's exactly the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's resilience in the fact that you can get you've got a battery for a start. You've got a head start to begin with. Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
The other one, just very briefly, the other one that was even more pertinent really was Fukushima. So after the tsunami, the only vehicles that could get in and out of where the real catastrophic damage was done. And this was to do search and rescue and help people escape and all that stuff, were electric cars. So both Nissan and Mitsubishi donated like 50 cars each. They could, because a lot of the places still did have power, or they could mock up the power, but all the petrol stations were destroyed and unusable because of the damage. And so they were using electric vehicles as search and rescue vehicles in the really badly damaged areas after the tsunami, which is again completely counterintuitive. You'd think you'd want a big, roughy, tufty, 4-wheel drive SUV to do that, and they were actually doing in Nissan Leafs and Mitsubishi i-Me, which is the first electric car I had, is the most non-roughy, tufty vehicle. It definitely isn't a butch car. I didn't used to get out of that thing.
One of those. They're like the round. They're
little round bubble. Yeah. But it was brilliant. Oh, I loved it. But that is okay. So I've got two questions then. Is it Green Party policy to advocate that we transition to 100% renewable power? Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah,
that's the only way we're going to get to net zero carbon.
Well, yes.
Yeah, no, you've got to drive. I mean, for lots of reasons, you've got to drive out the fossil fuels and the burning of stuff effectively. In the cities, it's for air pollution reasons as well. And what you said before is, if we take all the cars we have now and make them all electric cars, we're not really solving all of the problems, and we are. Certainly from an air pollution perspective, electric cars do give out particulates from how they sort of grind the tires on the road, how they kick up dust, things like the brakes. There's quite a lot that goes on there in what is still a big vehicle, heavy, lots of engineering to transport one person around, that leads to problems with air pollution. And particulate pollution is one of those things that's not, we haven't really got to the bottom yet of how dangerous it is. And the tiny particles, the more we look at it, seem to be more and more dangerous. And these are the things that come off these, the machine wear kind of problems that I just said. So yeah, we've got to be reducing the amount of driving we do, and changing, I think, the model for things like car ownership. If you've got a vehicle that you own, that you leave sitting idle the entire time, you're not personally driving it, doesn't make a lot of sense. But shared vehicles have got real potential, and that still isn't really taking off as much as you would like. We've got the very aggressive marketing tactics that Uber have used to take over the market, that would the journeys that would be that market, if that makes sense. Which is a taxi model. A lot of those Uber drivers drive around empty of passengers. It's not the most efficient thing. Plus, they've taken over the market and not created a lot of good jobs. They're not paying the drivers. We've got behind because of what Uber have done on shared transport, I think. But there's a lot of problems still to solve in our cities, I think. And I don't know. Again, Uber they're not in every part of the UK because there isn't the critical mass of people wanting to do those journeys yet. And I think you've got to do more positive shifting of people to not owning a car and wanting to use shared ownership in places where there isn't naturally a market of people who just don't own cars anyway because they live in an area with good public transport. So there's an awful lot still to do in terms of the organisation and the mission that we need to go on to reduce the number of journeys we make in cars, as well as picking up the vehicles themselves. And there isn't, I don't think a lot of policy makers think about it the way that I do. And I come out of campaigning on cars, first of all, on the 4x4s, and then on roads, where I work for Campaign for Better Transport. So all these different dimensions of what a smart plan for sorting out transport would be are kind of in my head, and they're not in other people's heads. You still have far too many politicians who think that to relieve congestion, you build extra roads. And that's like the least clever thing you can possibly think if you're thinking about transport.
Because that has been the case for most of my adult life. Even if I've used cars and flown and done all those things, I've understood that if you make a road bigger, it just doesn't work. You know, and I mean, we benefit now, you know, at the moment when I had to drive down to Bristol the other day, you know, and where my children are, and I benefit now from the road building that took place because there's very few people on the road. So it's really easy. But you just go, this is crazy use of land, if nothing else. I mean, that is,
yeah.
When you think, because I'm old enough, sadly, I can remember my mum and dad taking my brother and I to watch them building the M1. So, which was the first motorway in the UK. And it went not that far, it was probably 10 miles from where we lived in Northamptonshire at the time. And, you know, it was so exciting for us, all these diggers and big machines making this road that is now like part of our, you know, it looks natural. It's been there so long. Not really.
I'm not sure I agree with you on that one.
But I mean, it is such a. I think that that's what I feel about the pandemic, is that it's shown me. You know, it embarrassed me, and I'm sort of think of myself as thinking about these things. But because I get flown by car companies to go and see their new car in, you know, generally European short haul flights. But it's great. What I did in 2018, 19 was where I went, this is too much. You know, even I then noticed, what am I doing flying? I flew to South Korea for 2 days. Flew to South Korea, got out, got in a car, drove it, filmed it, got out, got in a plane, flew back. What? I mean, that is just, it's so unsustainable. And then wretched, awful Greta Thunberg told me I was wrong. And it was so annoying to be absolutely shamed by a 15-year-old.
Very no uncertain terms as well. So.
Yeah, she would have said. And I mean, she's right. And that's the thing. I think one of the arguments and the important discussions that, you know, you are absolutely at the forefront of is, she is right. The people that were sat around Oxford Circus, the Extinction Rebellion, I 100% agree with them. But what makes me concerned is it's very easy to point at a coal burning power plant and go, that is just stupid, uneconomic, ridiculous rubbish. And we've got to stop. So hang on a minute, because there's someone up the road who is in an old people's home with a heater, and that's where her energy is coming from. So how do we make sure she's not dying of cold, if nothing else? You know, what do we do to replace that? And it's the same with a diesel SUV that make me, I mean, I walk down a country lane here and I see someone drive past in a 3-ton diesel SUV on their own to go and buy a litre of milk. And I know, the trouble is, I know them, because when you live in a village, you know everyone. I go, I wave, and I mean, particularly in that instance, because those are people who can afford today to buy an electric car. You know, they have no excuse anymore. But anyway, don't want to talk about that. But how it's that focus, I think, is so important, of how we transition, of the systems we use to encourage car sharing and illustrate that owning your own car, I think it's generational. My generation are never going to give that up. You know, we were born I would, but a lot of people my generation, but you know, my son's generation, he's 27, he uses zip car sharing stuff when he needs a car, which is rare. He rides his bike most of the time.
That's the right thing to do. I think one of the difficulties with talking about transport policy is people think that, well, they like to look at things in isolation. So you propose one thing, and the answers that come back are like the FAQs are, but that won't solve all of my problems. Here is an example of a problem that it won't solve. And each individual, these are journeys. They don't have to all be made the same way. They're journeys with different purposes, with different numbers of people, at different times of day, with different levels of necessity. So some journeys you can just eliminate. You can the whole putting the supermarket on the outside of the town thing on the ring road where everybody drives there is so unsustainable, and it's made such a problem for local centres, for town centres, for those sort of corner shop clusters that, you know, if you go around places, that those corner shop clusters are really in decline. And just bringing things back so that your basic essentials are within walking distance for everybody, that eliminates journeys. Then you don't have to think about how to take those journeys at all. That's just around the corner. That's something that's really open to, that's unexploited. Town planning has been an absolute disaster.
Yes.
For such a long time and needs fixing. Then you've got journeys that are, they're short enough that they could be taken by walking and cycling, but the roads are too hostile to make that nice. So you've got the whole healthy streets thing to make that more attractive, so that people will choose shorter journeys to do in different ways. And then you've got the medium to longer journeys, which are a real mixture of things. There's all kinds of reasons for taking a medium to longer journey. And there you've really got to have something that's comprehensive and so that there are lots of different options for people and everybody doesn't feel stuck using their cars. And then you've really got the point where more and more people can choose not to own a car. But things like getting rid of buses. I don't know what the buses are like in your area.
We get one. There's two days a week. You can go into Cheltenham on market day and come back. And it's so heartbreaking because I've seen it go past when I've been walking twice, and I know the driver, and I waved at him. There was no one on it. But even in normal times, it's basically the handful of pensioners that live in the village. It's very few people use it. It's all private cars, and it's amazing that bus still runs. I'm staggered that it does. I mean, it goes through about 15 villages on the way into Cheltenham and same on the way out. And that's how, that is a generational thing, because I can remember that all my childhood journeys were by bus. I lived in a village outside of town. We catch the bus into town and do shopping in the market and catch the, when I was a little kid with my mum, that's how we do it. My dad had a car with work, but he was out, so we didn't use that, And that was, we were, I would say, a middle to upper middle class family. It wasn't that we were a poor family. It was, we just, that's not what no one did. There was actually a brilliant mate sent a photograph he found in a box, which was taken of me. You will know it, Thornhill Square in Islington. It's me on my bike in Thornhill Square in Islington in 1974. It's so embarrassing because my hair is ridiculous. And behind me, there's a Ford Anglia. So that's a car of the 60s. That
I don't know. My family had a Ford Anglia, but I don't remember it though. I was too young.
Right, but the point is, that was it. There was a Ford Anglia in Thornhill Square. You couldn't see any other cars. I mean, you saw mostly houses, but what you could see was quite a lot of street with one car. It was all squats then, a lot of squat. That's why I was visiting them. It was a squat. But the lack of cars is staggering. So I walked through Thornhill Square a couple of years ago to go and see a mate, and it was bumper to bumper SUVs. It was jam packed with cars. You could not possibly park another car in Thornhill Square.
Yeah, no, that used to be on my cycle ride to work, and I know it really well. The area where I'm a councillor, which is Highgate in Camden, is a lot of Victorian Edwardian sort of villas and houses on the street. And we've got, obviously I'm a local councillor, so I get involved in lots of huge stuff. There's a whole archive of photographs from when it was first built, where there are no cars on the streets, and you cannot believe how wide the streets look.
Yes,
in photographs. They're not using special lenses. It's just there is genuinely like 20 meters between the homes. There's this little bit of pavement, and then this giant road.
Yeah.
And at the moment now, it's because it's got cars on either side, and they're bigger cars than they ever were.
Yeah.
The whole thing feels narrow, but in the photos without the cars, it's so wide. It's ridiculous. And this is the space that we're giving up to something.
To have something, to leave something there for 90% of the time. I mean, that's the difficult thing, because I'll get so many comments of people saying, oh, it's all right for you. You're living in your privileged bubble and blah, blah, blah. Or, I have to park a car on the street. How can I charge my electric car? And there isn't an answer. It's the basic thing. The answer is, I'm biting with the answer is, don't have a car, which is easy to say if I've got one, But I mean, I lived in London for 14 years, in and around Islington and Bermondsey and all sorts of places. And when I arrived in London, because I'd been living out in the sticks, I had a little van. And I think it was about a year after I moved out, I went, what the hell am I doing with this wretched thing? It's such a pain. I'm not using it. I'm using my bike. So I got rid of it. I don't think I sold it. I think I gave it away, which was a burden to whoever I gave it to. And I didn't have a car for 14 years because I lived in the centre of London. I didn't need one. What was and I was a bit of a car person. You know, I grew up with, my brother is in motor racing, so he's an engineer, he's retired now. But, you know, that's the world I lived in, with engines and noise and cars, and, you know, and I thought stupid. And I went obsessively anti-car when I was a cyclist in London, because I'm sure you can understand. You know, I just went, this is wrong. This is just crazy, you know, and so dangerous. I was so lucky because I cycled in London for decades and didn't suffer severe injury like I knew many people did. I mean, you know, a couple of people I knew were killed in traffic accidents.
Yeah, well, the death toll in London is still far, far, far too high, and there was a huge campaign, and that's how we started to get the segregated cycle routes.
Yeah, which is so brilliant.
Properly safe. They're just for the bikes. And that was as a result of campaigning that came out of a series of deaths that were absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, it was just so scary to cycle. You had to really be committed to it.
Yeah.
And now we've got a much better system of routes, and more and more people are cycling. And obviously, that's the way most people were getting around during the first lockdown as well. The amount of bikes on the road were outnumbering. I sat
I'm sure.
for a while, and they were outnumbering the cars, which is absolutely fantastic. But it can be a slightly privileged position, because, you know, if you aren't giving people the alternatives, then they're stuck. But car dependency is awful. Like what you were just saying, that in your household there were, I don't know, 4 of you, and one of you had a car. That was your dad, and he off with the car. That left the rest of you dependent on what else there was.
Yeah.
So even if you argue that people have a right to own a car, not everybody in every household is going to have that car at their disposal at all times. You need better alternatives as well. So it's about getting all of that right. And it's not simple. There isn't a silver bullet for any of this. And whenever you produce an idea, people often try and treat it in isolation and say, well, that won't solve everything.
Yeah.
And it's about changing the whole system and transforming into what we could have. And I think, going back to what you said about lockdown, you know, this idea that people did get a glimpse of what we could aim for.
Yes. Yeah.
It helps, because then you've got a goal in mind of streets that are genuinely quiet, where there isn't traffic all over the place. And if people think, well, we want to get to there, what are the different things we can do to get there?
Yeah.
As opposed to just treating every idea as an unwelcome change. That's helpful, I think.
Because I think the other thing, particularly in this country, I mean, I've just done a little report about it. It's Ella Kissy Deborah, the 9-year-old girl that died of, you know, it's now been officially recognised that part of the reason this poor kid died at the age of 9 was because of local air traffic pollution.
On her new death certificate.
Yeah. So she lived near South Circular Road. And I mean, you know, it's that. And I think that general understanding, it's a bit like smoking. It's like asbestos. It's like all those things where the same tactics were used. I mean, you probably are aware, I think it's back there, the Merchants of Doubt, the book that it explains so clearly. And yet, you know, to get that information to a broad audience is very difficult. But the same people, the actual same living individuals who fought and fought and fought against smoking. We don't know that secondhand smoke is that bad for you. Yeah. There are reports that suggest it might actually benefit your health to breathe in secondhand smoke. You know, the lie, and they just delayed. And that's what was, when I understood that, they were never going to stop banning smoking or reducing. They knew that. They could delay it for a couple of decades while the companies adapted and sold their products in China, which is what and exactly the same tactics used by the fossil fuel industry. Yeah. They know that they're going out of business in the next 50 years. They know that in 50 years' time, Shell will not be extracting burnable liquid fuels. They won't be doing that. If they exist, they'll be doing something else. But they can delay it. So they can say, look at Shell's investment in green technology, while they're spending 50 times more exploring Arctic oil extraction. I mean, that's going on all over the bloody world. But but I think the public opinion has effectively swung in your favor, in favor of a party that recognizes that. And that's the critical thing, is coming up with solutions to those issues that are for the general public. You know, I always think of my sister. She's not interested in cars or public transport policy, but she's got to get to the shops. And how does she do that? And she asked me these questions. I haven't got the answer. I can't afford an electric car. Don't get one. Don't get a car. it's such a huge challenge to.
Yeah, it's a system that needs transforming. Yeah. It's like with the energy system. You've got to transform so many parts of it. From how people consume it, from how how devices and things use it.
Yeah.
To the industries that are going to fight tooth and nail to carry on the way they were, because change is hard for them. So yeah, it's a big job, and you need that vision, and you need people who are prepared to stand up to lobbyists and stick to the truth when people are trying to sow doubt. And I think that's our job in politics, going back to why we're here, basically.
Yeah.
It is our job. We're not necessarily there to get the majority in government, the two-party system that says, you must win over absolutely everybody. We're there to put a point of view and open up possibilities and have a voice that is expressing the views of a significant minority of people, and make sure that gets represented. And it's so frustrating to be in our political system where it's all, it must be all one thing or all another thing. Actually, you want to have a strong, mature government system where different parties maybe get together and you've got the different views represented, like New Zealand, which is such a mature democracy that even
that was a male scientist on the radio, on Radio 4, a couple of weeks ago, or I cannot remember who it was. I had heard of him. Anyway, he just analysed the number of infections and the death toll of COVID around the world, and the whatever it was, the 6 nations that stood out who've done very, very well were all governed by women.
Yeah,
just kind of And as a man, I sat there going, some ladies are not nice.
But also women in systems that are
collaborative.
Yeah, that's the key thing, because this is not something you can really play politics with. The virus doesn't care how. No,
it doesn't care if you voted green.
Your rhetoric is. Yeah, it really doesn't. You just got to find the right answer, and the right answer might not be evident all the time. The facts, the evidence may change. You might need to shift policy, and that's very difficult if you're a two-party Yahoo system. The changing policy will get you criticised. But if you've worked together with other people and said, we need to rethink. Okay, we'll change our policy, and we'll all agree that the policy's changed, and we'll explain to people. Then you win not only a better life as a politician that's less annoying. You also win more trust from the public and more support, more buy-in for what you're doing. And if you do need to make a difficult change, like go back to more lockdown or something like that, you're more likely to bring people with you and have them join in with it. And that saves lives in the end.
I mean, I just can't help mentioning, if you were a 12-year-old, highly privileged, elitist boy who wanted to be prime minister, and then you become prime minister, the curse of that. I'm not going to mention his name. I refuse to acknowledge it. But the curse of what's happened to that man, whose entire life and focus was, I'm going to be prime minister. And then you become prime minister at the most critically hideous time in human history for over 100 years. And you're lumbered with that. I mean, I do not envy you or any other politician. I've remained, I think now, I'm glad. I would have been a seriously rubbish politician. I'd have constantly said the wrong thing. But what a burden. And in a sense, I cannot sympathize and I cannot feel sorry for him. But what a hideous job at the moment to, any party in power now would be thrashing around, because no one knows what you bloody do. It's incredibly difficult.
He's never taken the jobs he has seriously. This is the problem with privilege, is you feel entitled and you don't feel like you need to be professional.
No, it doesn't matter what you do. And not all his mates are the same. They do whatever they like. I don't want to talk about him anymore. He's too amazing. There's one more topic I just would love to cover, simply because I can feel it in my waters, its resurgence, which is nuclear power. So I don't know if you know about Rolls-Royce, but Rolls-Royce are rolling out. And so they are building one now. What do they call it? Small, medium-sized SMR, small, medium reactor. And I've heard people talk about this a lot, and that you could have one in a new housing estate and you'd bury it in the ground and you wouldn't touch it for 30 years and it would produce more power than anyone could ever use. And you go, And it's one argument that I have sat uncomfortably on the fence about, simply because if you look at the world of nuclear power plants that we have around the world, they have been incredibly safe and they've produced an enormous amount of electricity, in their history. And the ones that went wrong, we all know about, because when they go wrong, it's really, really bad. But actually, it's relatively few. I mean, I don't know how many there are, but there's hundreds and hundreds of them, thousands around the world. The problem I've always had is, what about the waste? And I've done 3 now talks at Sellafield to the engineers there over the last 10 years, and they're amazing. And those people, I want the British public to, at some point in the future, to thank them like we've thanked NHS staff. If they don't do their job really well, we're in serious bloody trouble, because they've got a metric ton of dangerous stuff to look after.
Yeah, the risk management calculation there, the risk of messing up versus the consequences. The consequences of messing up there are so huge, because there's so much waste, and it's all very, very dangerous.
But there was one guy said one thing that we interviewed. Helen Chesky interviewed a man who's working on nuclear fusion in Oxford, and he's saying he says we have no choice. We have to produce as much electricity that we use as possible using renewables, and that all those technologies are far more important than what he's doing. He said it's the last kilowatt hour that worries me. It's not the first. We can do the first without even passing we don't even have to think about it. We can do the first gigawatts. We can do the first 50 gigawatts. It's the last, he was basically saying the last megawatt hour. How do you produce that? So, and I have a agile tariff, which shows me by the half hour how much electricity is. Today, it is stinkingly expensive. And that is because there's very low wind. There's no solar. It's cold. There's a lot of electricity use. And I'm the only reason everything that you see now is running on batteries, which I charged last night when it was cheap. So I can mitigate that cost at the moment as a privileged middle class celebrity oik. It was one of the new ones I was called recently.
Yeah, no,
I haven't got a solution for that at the moment.
Okay, yeah. To my mind, storage is the thing. So the nuclear reactors you just talked about, they're not as small as all that. It is. No,
they're still not small. I thought they were going to be like a container. They're huge.
All a bit terrifying, that idea, and I'm not keen on it. I think storage and batteries are, the thing that we need to be careful about. Winter's a real problem for for solar and wind. It's a weird one for us. So we have to be doing the things like the tidal and the storage, so that when we have got some solar and we have got some wind, we're stacking it up. And then the grid's been having problems because of access to markets as well, so there's like a little there's been very expensive electricity recently. It's been
the B word has had an effect. Then the B word's had an effect on electricity prices in the UK due to us buying it from those foreigners over the other side of the sea.
It's one bit of the recent price warning type thing that's been going on. But we aren't quite, like you said, that last kilowatt hour. We haven't quite got everything solved, but we're very, very close. And I think storage is. So you're a practical kind of person, aren't you?
Well, I can watch people who are practical. I'm very good at doing that.
I mean, basic physics, right? If you want to store some energy, you put something up high.
And you let it roll down low.
And then it comes down again, and then you get the electricity back. Often that's water. That's like, stored hydro. But it cannot be beyond our power to come up with other ways.
Oh no, there's amazing technologies being developed.
Using the simple kinetic thing. I mean, and so like the idea that you might. Potential energy. What am I saying? Oh my God. My high school physics there failing me. Potential energy of putting things up high. So the idea that you might have nuclear reactors in your housing estate and not some novel battery, ideally one that isn't based on like rare metals and things like that, is that, and that's I think the thing to be solving. But then if you've got a long winter, then your batteries aren't necessarily going to last the winter, so you need to be making sure you've got your tidal power.
But there's also compressed air technologies that are coming up, which are I really like the idea. There's a big plant at Birmingham University, which is a big industrial thing that does hissing and goes. It's not a little sort of thing, but that compresses air to staggering amounts of I don't even know what it is, but it's just air. So when you undo it and you drive a generator from it, what comes out is air that went in.
Let's get our thermodynamics textbooks out and think of some other ways of storing energy. Because I think, again, with transport, the more different ways we have of doing that, the better. Yes. And I think, between wind and solar, we've got the energy and tidal, we've got all the energy we could possibly need. It's just a case of organising it right. Yeah. And that's the problem we haven't quite solved, but I'm pretty confident we can get there quite soon. Yes.
Oh, well, that's good. And I mean, I'm sure I agree with you, because that is always the bugbear for me, is that, is that the responsibility. It's the ultimate dealing with something and giving it to our great grandchildren. There's going to be someone who's born today whose great grandchildren will have to deal with what's at Sellafield, and you think that is a pretty unpleasant legacy to dump on that generation who won't even know. We will so not exist historically, and they go, "Why have we got this stuff?"
Yeah. And we're not getting rid of that. That's not something.
Yeah, that's here. We're lumbered with that. Yeah, because it is mind-boggling when you see it. I mean, I've only done the kind of tourist tour around Sellafield, and the scale of that project is huge, and the money that went into that in my childhood to help develop nuclear weapons. And the last time I went, I actually saw it. It was so bizarre because it was on the news at the time, a train that was going from Sellafield down to probably Liverpool to the docks, which was returning reprocessed nuclear waste to Japan. This is before the Fukushima. And the people who lived near that railway claimed they could feel heat as it went past, which I think is probably, psychosomatic or something. But
feel the psychological heat.
Yes, you? Yeah. But I mean, it was highly toxic radioactive waste that was being returned. So they reprocessed it in some way to make it a bit safer, and then it was going back on ships to Japan. And you go, that is not a very sustainable energy supply, as it will be sold to you by. A lot of very, very pro-nuclear people watch Fully Charged. They would say that's the answer to the last, and they're always pro-renewables. But they see that the perfect balance is renewables and nuclear as the perfect solution, because we can't store 50 gigawatt hours or 1,000 gigawatt hours. Of course you can. Yeah.
You're being very unimaginative if you think the nuclear power is the answer.
Well, it is. That's economics as well, isn't it? I mean, because I've followed it very closely because I have friends there. But the first big Tesla battery that was installed in South Australia, next to a wind farm.
And that's helping balance their grid, no end.
It stopped two huge blackouts now, when they didn't even know. The engineers that run the grid didn't understand why they didn't have a blackout, because that thing, and then they go, oh, it's the bloody battery kicked in. We didn't know. Within 1/100th of a second, it's just, and that's making money now. That battery installation imagine what it cost. I can't imagine, but it now makes money. So the company that invested in it are making a profit already. It's only been there 4 years or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure all our faith in batteries either, though. That's no. Chemical batteries, not so much.
Well, I don't know. Have you heard of gravitricity? That's my favourite thing that I've come across in the whole of Fully Charged.
That sounds more like it. I don't know what it is.
That is using disused coal mines.
Yes.
And it's basically a sash window weight going up and down a coal mine.
That's what I'm talking about.
It's exactly that.
Yeah.
Genius guy in Edinburgh has worked it out, and they are building the first one. And when I first mentioned it, I think I said, and this weight in the thing will weigh like 5 tons, like huge. No, it's 3,000 tons, the weight that goes up and down. So it generates megawatts. It's a megawatt generating plant when it's dropping for like 4 hours, because it doesn't go down fast. It's going down slowly. It's extraordinary.
Driving a turbo, it's not that hard. There are gears and weights. Come on, people.
Yes. Well, I think that is the exciting thing, and it's something I would love the Green Party to be. I'm sure you are aware of it, but the enthusiasm and excitement of engineers, that's something I learned doing scrap heap all those years. There's a really difficult problem. I look at it and go, oh, God, that's rubbish. It's not going to work. And an engineer looks at it and goes, oh, brilliant.
Yeah,
it's not working.
That's the thing. Something I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how that works. Yeah.
I mean, there's actually, I mean, to plug the Greens again, a lot of us have got a science background.
Yes, exactly.
Which is very interesting. I've got a metallurgy degree, and so I've been in lots of nuclear power stations, looking at the cracks, and not literally, but I am aware of things like metal fatigue and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then Natalie Bennett's got an agricultural science degree.
Right.
My Amelia Womack, my deputy leader colleague, is biosciences of some kind. Right. Rosie Sexton, who stood against us for leadership, she's the chair of the Green Councillors.
Right.
She's a scientist as well. She's got she's like maths and physics degrees, things like that. So we love our problem solving.
Yes, that's great. I mean, I think that
we just interesting new information. We're not defensive about it the way a lot of politicians are when they worried they might have been wrong about something. If you're wrong about something as a scientist, you're like, that teaches me something. Excellent.
Yes. Well, I really hope you enjoyed that. It was a fascinating conversation. I really hope we can have more talks with Siân and other people from the Green Party over the coming years. And maybe we should just do ones from all the different political parties of Europe. I don't know. I'd love to do one with, Grant Shapps. I've interviewed Grant Shapps, who is the current Transport Secretary in the UK. And we got on alarmingly well. He's a conservative. He is a Brexiteer conservative, and yet he understands the enormous necessity to remove fossil fuel-powered transportation from our streets. He and some of his children have asthma, and they live in London, and they suffer because of it. And so a lot of the topics we deal cross all political boundaries. People know we've got to change. So, I mean, maybe I should do that, and maybe I should talk to someone from the Labour Party. A very good friend of mine is a Labour MP. I haven't spoken to her for years. She's amazing. Liberal Democrat, I suppose. I could talk to a German member of the German Green Party or a communist. I'd have to talk to a French communist, a French intellectual communist. Oh, that would be wonderful, because they're really hard work. I've met a few of them in my former lives. They were not relaxing company. I think it's fair to say that. Doesn't matter what you did, you were wrong. And bourgeois. Anyway, that's all. Please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Show podcast and tell your friends about it, because we're going to get some amazing people on. I've already recorded some really, really interesting podcasts, which, if I was better organized, I'd tell you what was coming next week. I haven't got a clue, but it's going to be good. That's it. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.